we're back. We are live. We got a guest again today. Today, our guest is Yuji Suzuki. Yuji is a doctor of chiropractic, like our resident witch doctor here, Alex Twangy. He's also a CSCS, so he shares something in common with both of us. He is living in Oregon. Is that right, Yuji? Oregon, right? He's got his
Yep.
own practice where he does athletic performance and rehab, and he actually just launched something new. I'll let him speak on that when he gets a chance here. Usually played college baseball at Concordia St. Paul, which is actually the same place I played. We missed each other by a year, I think. Yes,
Interjection.
Alex.
I knew you. I knew that name.
Right.
Unbelievable. Okay, I was
Yeah.
like, I freaking know this guy. I was like, where is he from?
Yeah.
Yes.
Your name have come across, Alex. Your name has come across many conversations at
Oh,
Concordia with some of the guys we
yeah,
both
yeah.
know.
It is crazy. Like Zach, keep your thoughts, Zach. But like the degrees of separation in the baseball world is like 3. Like especially when you're old, like when you're old like me and you've been around it, like it's like 3 degrees of separation. So that's cool. All right, continue on.
100%. And it's
Yeah.
worth mentioning, too, that Yuji is something of a celebrity on that campus. Whenever I tell people around the Twin Cities that I played at CSP, it's like a 20% chance somebody goes, "Did you play with Yuji?" And I'm like, "No, I missed him. I think he graduated right before I transferred there." And people are like, "Oh, no, he's great."
That's interesting.
So I don't know. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that's all about. But yeah, that happens every now and then. So Yuji, thanks for doing this, man. I think it's going to be fun to chat and talk about our shared philosophies and where we might disagree. Did I miss anything useful, important?
Yeah. So just some clarification on what I currently do. I am. So what I'm doing in person most of the time is I'm working part time for a kind of a performance PT clinic slash gym where I am kind of working with their youth program. So I get to work with youth athletes kind of ranging from ages, 8 to 18, 19, 20. That's kind of what I do in person. That's kind of separate from what I do on my own. What I do on my own is currently all remote, with the hopes to maybe one day kind of bring it in person again to work with people in pain. But that's more of like a remote coaching side, some performance goals, some pain management goals, stuff like that. So just like a tiny bit of clarification there. When you say my own practice, it kind of sounds fancy and cool. But it's, right now I would say it's kind of a coaching gig that I'm continuing to kind of try to expand so that I can support as many people as I can who resonates with my message.
And the kids you're working with, are they across all sports? Are you focusing on baseball, any one particular sport?
It's all over. I like that I get to work with people like kids who are in, soccer, football, volleyball, baseball, softball, basketball, as well as kids who don't even play sports. If anything, I think those are most like the coolest moments when I get to introduce kids to, using the gym as a way to like just get them to enjoy movement and then like kind of find excitement in that challenge of like, hey, I can actually do this. It's challenging, but it's safe for me to push myself. I think I love those moments when I get to do that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like people, I think there's too much transactional nature with exercise and fitness. People are trying to get in shape or they're trying to do this or that. It's okay to do it for its own sake sometimes, And I want to dive into the ecological philosophy that you talk about sometimes, but I think that really like leads a person to start looking at movement that way because if you're trying to establish that kind of interaction with an environment around you, you got to be open and willing to do it for its own sake, right? You can't be just trying to win or trying to like get in shape or get jacked or whatever all by itself. It's got to be, you got to have some semblance of like a flow state too, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's the ecological stuff really resonated with what like what I've been feeling kind of the whole time I was kind of like starting to get into this career. Um, I was one of those athletes who got hurt, went to PT slash, I think they might have been a chiro too, but I hurt my elbow. They scraped my arm with a tool for 5 months, and then told me to go back on the field and just like go through this throwing progression. Just use your legs. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? But I'm gonna give it a go, right? And during that process, it's like I lost so much of my like athleticism and the freedom to move, right? Like those people who like come out of rehab and they just don't throw the same. I think I was one of those kids, and like I used to throw like a splitter slash fork ball because that's what every Japanese pitcher does. But during that process, I heard that fork ball was just not good for the arm, so I didn't throw it once for the rest of my career. Like, if I had somebody who could guide me through this process, just to actually have more open discussion, more time to actually like process all of this, like my career would have been different. Not that I'm like regretting everything that's happened, because things happen for a reason, and I'm very happy with where I'm at currently and thankful for the experience that I got. But if I can support another athlete that's going through something like that currently, and adapt through that process of pain, rehab, and become even better, maybe in a different way, but that would be awesome. That's my ultimate goal, I
I
think.
love
That's
that.
such a tragedy, taking away a fork ball.
Yeah, come on, man. But it's so crazy because it's like all three of us had similar like experiences coming through. You get hurt, you do your best to come back, you get hurt, you do your best to come back, you get hurt, and you just are never really the same. And then you age and you realize that the short-sightedness of being hurt is the biggest detriment of the whole thing. Like the mindset of being like, okay, I have to do these specific things to get better. Whereas now, as we've aged, we realize like half of those things don't even really matter. Like they really don't. It's more about your perception of where you're at in the state of like Zach was saying, like that flow state of like, where are you actually at mentally to put yourself in a good position to like let your body respond. Because if you have that mindset, like I'm sure Zach and I talk about this all the time, but if you have that mindset of I'm injured, this is not working for me, I need to do this way, you've shut like 70% of the doors that could potentially make you better. And if you just have that open mindedness, like you said, Yuji, where you're like, okay, I might not get better in the way that I want to today, but if I can just get better at one part of something today, if I can make like one or two wins today of just like little itty bitty things, like I had like 7 good reps where I felt good and I didn't think about anything, that's a huge win for anybody in pain, regardless of age or performance status, which I think is like the biggest gripe I have with like the passive modality approach is like you need me to make you better. Like the only way you're going to get better is you need me. It's like that's not how people actually heal. People heal when they take on the task themselves and then like move forward. So that's cool. That's cool that he thinks about it that way too.
Yeah,
I dig that.
I think, yeah, like two things come to my mind after your points there. Um, and I might have already lost them, but I think the first one is like, or at least one of them is that the, like the short-sightedness is one of the things that you mentioned. Is like when we have pain, obviously we want to get rid of the pain, right? Like that's natural and normal. But as clinicians, coaches, if we only focus in that when the people who are working with are already in that state, and forget to like, hey, like push them to open up their uh, uh, thoughts to like, hey, what do we want in the long term, right? Like instead of just getting rid of the pain, like what do we need to do to help you perform better, or help you, you know, run around with your grandkids in the future, or whatever. Like all those things, when we get to expand that timeline a little bit, I think therapy just gets
Yeah.
better, because we're not just trying to get rid of the pain, we're actually helping somebody to thrive
Yes.
after pain,
Mhm.
right? and that's not saying we have to forget about pain. Like, it's the ability to zoom in and focus on the pain, because that's very important. But at the same time, not losing sight of, hey, what do we need to do in the future? What happens when you don't get to work with me anymore, right? Like, am I setting them up for success when I'm not there holding their hands? And if that's the end goal, I can't be holding their hands the entire time, right? Um, so that's one of the points that I kind of came to my mind. The other one is like, there's a lot more room for exploration even when we have pain, especially when we know those boundaries of like S&C principles, like anatomy and physiology. Like, these things are important so that we can set boundaries of like, okay, right now, these are areas that we don't want you to go, because that might be a little too much in terms of your pain or your recovery after surgery or whatever. But there's a lot more room over here on this other side that you don't have to do things perfectly. You can actually kind of explore variability, explore different ways to achieve this task, right? And especially we get to have, I have the luxury to, kind of program the entire thing sometimes. So I get to kind of have some of those activities that are maybe less targeted, but more focused on, hey, let's uh, like open up your degrees of freedom, to use kind of some nerdy words, I guess. But
That's great.
I think it's great. I went through. I did a little Yuji Suzuki study guide before we recorded, and I was going through your Instagram, and I saw you posted a little snippet of a presentation you gave at the Sport Movement Skill conference, and you spoke a little bit on that just now. But I really liked the analogy of learning to play with fire. I think that's it's such an astute way to put it. Because like you said, if you are narrowing boundaries and you can really you can exist with no pain and really thrive, but you can only do so in such a narrow boundary, then you're going to have a really hard time making that sustainable, right? Really, for most regular humans and athletes alike, being able to open up and broaden the bandwidth is a much more prudent endeavor for somebody to undertake, where they're trying to say, I can handle more unexpected things, because you can't control life, right? I mean, a regular person trying to have a healthy and fit body needs to be able to slip on ice and catch themselves in an uncomfortable position without just crumbling into shambles. And you have to learn to play with the fire, because you never really know when you're going to run into it. And that goes for athletes and normies alike. I appreciate this this analogy here, really on like a deep level, because it makes perfect sense to me.
Yuji, where'd you go to chiro school at?
Northwestern in Minnesota.
Same.
Yeah. So what I did was, I went to Concordia, did my undergrad, and moved to Japan for a couple of years, and then decided that I was okay with being done with baseball. I'm going to come back, just extend my education, and honestly, chiro school let me in pretty quickly. So I'm like, all right, let's do it.
You just have to have a pulse, man. If you can blink twice, they'll let you in. And like, kudos to everybody who goes through it, but it is like, to get to the point of just becoming like a DC, like a chiropractor, there's really not a lot of, if we're talking about windows and boundaries, like the depth and breadth of knowledge that you learn while you're there is not really anything it's so specific to the philosophy that they promote and to get through that board exam. But then tell me if I'm out of line here, Yuji, but I would say that 98% of what I use in the day-to-day for like pain management, rehab, and even just speaking with people came from my time in gyms, came from my time going through injuries, came from my time in the studies that I've done outside of it that's based around like neurological perception and how people just function, and just the way that you're taught to take an exam when you're in school versus what an exam really is, which is just letting someone tell you what's happening with them and learning about them, and then they just lead you where you need to be. It was I don't know if you did the same thing as me, but the point I'm getting to is by the end of chiro school, I think I was there maybe 4% of the time. Like, I was just like, I've got, my grades are plenty good. I was like, I need to learn, like I need to be elsewhere, was kind of how it ended up for me, and how Zach and I kind of ended up meeting each other, because I was like, I got to get into something else because this is going to kill me if I keep going this way.
Yeah. I don't want this to turn into a chiro school rant. But I think that's with any
Right.
schooling, right? Like if there's the popular saying of like, don't get school, get in the way of learning. And I'm definitely thankful that I had the ability and the opportunities to actually learn things outside of school. As I was finishing up school, like COVID hit, so everything shut down. But if there was silver lining to that, everything went online, right? Like I had so much time, and everybody was just pushing free educational webinars, content, dirt cheap, whatever. So I just gobbled those up, and then that led me to path of learning more about pain science, more about motivational interviewing and communication, things like ecological dynamics. Like that's something I came across in that 2020 year when I, just randomly purchased a recording of baseball conference or something because it was $10, and then came across Tyler Irby's presentation, like things like that. I think I, I mean, I'm really good at like discrediting how hard I work. At least that's what my wife tells me. But I did, like, I got lucky in terms of like timing and stuff like that. I just had those opportunities, but I did, put work into learning a bunch of stuff outside school because I felt necessary.
No, it's just like that. It's any type of schooling. Zach would say the same thing about like when he went through. It's just cool to see that there are other DCs out there that are like taking their mantra of what they do into their own hands and not like allowing themselves to be stuck into this is the niche I perform in, because it really shouldn't be that way. As physicians, as coaches, as instructors, like you can't just do one thing. You have to be able to have like a multifaceted approach, because not every person's going to fit what you do. And then the beauty of what you do, Yuji, is like interviewing people, I'm sure, is that you go, this person doesn't fit with me, and that's fine. Maybe I'm not their best option. Zach and I have talked about this too, is like sometimes you have to realize when even your best effort might not be the right effort for that person. And you just got to be okay with, and that's like a maturity thing. That took me a couple of years to get over my like ego of like, I can help everybody. And it's like, not everybody wants help, which either way, I'm sorry. I'm done with the chiro part. I just wanted to hear where you went to school. So, yeah.
No, but I mean, love that though. Cause like that's really tough for the practitioner side of things too. If you try to help everyone and then inevitably you're going to fail, it's like, I was like first couple of years of practice, I like every night that I was driving home, I was like, fuck.
You're good. French is welcome here. You're fine.
Fuck, I suck today. Like I was terrible. Like, and I mean, yes, that led to me learning more, but those were tough days. Or like, I know I could be doing this better. Like why can't I help this person in the way that I feel like it should be? Like that's tough. And I still have those days sometimes, even in coaching too. It's like that session could have been so much better. Like I sucked, right? But I can, again, maturity thing, I get to kind of turn that quickly to like, okay, like in what ways? Like how could I have done that better? And why did it feel like it sucked? And just I get to ask those questions, and I still have a lot of growing to do, I'm sure, but I definitely feel a lot more at peace, I guess, is maybe the best way to describe it.
You know what I think is really comforting for me sometimes is, and I think I'm so thankful for the type of kids that I just lucked into working with and how open they are with communicating. We all have those days where you leave the session, you're like, fuck, that I sucked today. Like I can't believe anybody wants to work with me. I was just not, I didn't have it. I didn't have the energy that I wanted to have. Like I wasn't fully present. Like I was having one of those days like recently. So this is recency bias, but I was literally sitting there like stewing and being like, "You're a piece of shit, Zach. Like, I can't believe you." And two kids just unprompted started talking about like, "Man, training here is so much better than where we used to train. Like, I can't believe like how much more you like actually talk to us. Like our old coach like didn't even pay attention to us. Like he would just kind of like walk away." And it makes me feel like a little bit better, knowing that the fact that you care, like, you know, who doesn't beat themselves up? Bad coaches, bad trainers, bad coaches, bad practitioners don't have that. They leave the session, they're like, I'm the shit. Like, people are lucky to have me, you know? And
Yeah. Or worse yet, it's the client's fault, right? Like
Yeah.
they sucked. Like they didn't bring the energy, or they don't care enough about their future with pain.
yeah,
It's like it's a blessing and a curse, right? Like it helps us get better, but it's also like we just have tough days, and it's always nice to connect with people who are kind of in that same boat and realize that, hey, you're not the only one feeling that way, and that's great that you care, but it's okay to be kind to yourself too.
But you can't just dig yourself all the way into the bottom. I do that all
I'm
the
still
time.
working on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We
It's
got a
long,
lot of
long.
a lot of self-loathing over here on this side of the podcast. Uh, so, what was it that initially drew you to chiropractic school? Of all of the paths that a person can take, you know, physical therapy school, just regular old strength and conditioning coach, chiropractic, medical, et cetera, et cetera. What was it about chiropractic at first that drew you there? Right? I mean, we just spent like 5 minutes shitting on it, but if we go way back to Yuji in 2000, whatever that was, 18, 19, and what initially interested you, what was that?
So I was in Japan at the time. Um, I had considered physical therapy, but I knew that getting into physical therapy school was like very, very hard. I didn't want to delay my life for extra 1 to potentially 3 years trying to do that. And and this is just my naiveness of like not doing a ton of research into the chiropractic field, but my perception and my limited understanding of it was that it was going to allow me to work with people in pain. It potentially has a slightly even larger scope of practice than physical therapy. And it's like a doctorate degree, which, you know, at the time I was like, sick, I'm going to be a doctor. And again, frankly, the fact that I was, yes, the fact that I was in Japan and I was able to get in pretty quickly. I had messaged and not really, I was kind of like trying to get more information, but they were like, you could start in like 2 months. I was like, oh, I wonder if this is an actual legit option. Um, and ultimately, you know, like it, I think it felt like it was going to allow me to continue to use my like knowledge and passion for movement to in a productive way, I guess, to society. Um, and I just like at the time I didn't want to be like a personal trainer with my exercise science degree because I know that how hard that life is too. But yeah, I don't. It's not like a very exciting story, I guess, but that's kind of how I ended up in school. Went through the whole like, as everybody does, like the 180 of like, oh, this philosophy stuff is cool. Chiropractic is actually cool, and then realizing like, wait, Kool-Aid, and then kind of getting out, learning more and more.
Yeah.
So my question for you, Yuji, is like my looking back on my experience when I was at chiropractic school. Like the reason that drew me into it is the same thing. I had somebody who really helped me who was a chiropractor, but he also had a performance background and he was played professional baseball, like kind of similar jive to us. Um, when I was there, I think the most valuable thing that happened was the way that they pushed anatomy for that first like year and a half. That I feel like that was the biggest. If all the money I paid went just to that, just to becoming extremely proficient in anatomy, I feel like that was like the largest win. Like when I look back in my time, just understanding what the actual structures look like and how they move and what the joints move like and how the body responds to stimulus, like through the chain of that, I felt like that was so valuable. If you could look back at your time, because like obviously you did it, right? And you made it through. What would you say was probably like your biggest either perspective change, not the Kool-Aid part, but like, what parts did you look back and you go, okay, at the time I hated this, but now looking back at it, like it was really good for me? Or what was the biggest takeaway? Like immediately you're like, that was such a big benefit.
I think um, anatomy was definitely huge. I had minimal exposure to things like that. Um, I think maybe like the most valuable thing was that I got to work under support of other clinicians, and I got to kind of make my own mistakes in a way, in a kind of a low risk, low cost situation, right? And I was able to work with some solid, like really good clinicians in there, where they would help me kind of give me the autonomy to kind of just like try out things on my own, instead of telling me, hey, this is exactly what you have to do, right? Like this is the exam you have to do, like this is how you document and stuff like that. Like it, I think autonomy and again, ability to make my own mistakes without a ton of risk, I guess. And that kind of goes for everything, right? Like just being able to like just explore and try things out and figuring out as you go, like wayfinding. I think that was the most valuable thing for me.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
When you so you've mentioned it a couple of times, you were here playing college baseball at CSP, and then you went back to Japan for a couple of years. At that time, was Japan home for you? Like, is that where you grew up?
Yeah. My so rest of my immediate family, or rest of all my family, lives in Japan. I'm the only one here, and my family lives in kind of areas around Tokyo, but the place I played in was a place called Toyama, so a little bit further away. But yeah, the short answer to your question is yes. Like Japan is technically my home. I just have moved a ton, so like it's one of those like
For
weird
sure.
questions, like where
Yeah.
is home? Um,
So what drew you to? So you're in Oregon now. Was that a dart on a map kind of thing? What drew you to go to? Because are you in the Beaverton area or something like that? I again, I did my Yuji Suzuki
yep.
study guide, but I think I already forgot.
Yeah, Portland, like just outside of Portland, right? It's like a suburb of Portland, but we're only like 15 minutes drive to get into like downtown Portland. Um, the reason why we got out here is like, okay, I met my wife in grad school, and we were like, if we don't move right after we graduate, we're just never going to get out of Midwest. And now is the kind of time to kind of like try out different areas. We were originally looking Seattle, but didn't like it when we visited. We had a couple friends that already lived here, so we visited here and like, oh, this is actually pretty nice. We were like, I don't know, different ideas of like West Coast probably would be easier to travel to Japan if I need to and stuff like that, but nothing, no like immediate ties or anything like that here.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of a departure from the sports performance discussion, but I think that's kind of really fascinating. I went to college in Florida before I transferred back here, but I had all these little things that drew me back to like the zip code where I grew up. And now I'm that guy that lives just down the road from where he grew up and went to high school. And, I never really thought that I'd be that guy as a kid, but there's all kinds of reasons to do it. And so people who just sort of up and go somewhere, it's this life philosophy that really interests me. I have family members that live in like rural America, like Kansas, right? Like little small towns, and they've never been outside their little bubble. And they're not
Mm,
adventurous. They don't like, and they're the types of folks that, down to the little things in their life, they do not branch outside their comfort zone. Like my uncle's got the one type of beer
mm,
he's drank since he was like 15, and that's it. Yeah, that's all that exists as far as he's concerned. And then I meet folks like I just recently had some interaction with this guy who is a international teacher, and his son used to train at our place here at Max Strength in the Twin Cities. And then they like moved, and I didn't think much of it. And then he reached out and he's like, "Hey, would you want to do some like remote like video analysis for me? I'm coaching this high school team now in Malaysia." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, we've lived all over the world." And he's sort of hand wavy about it, right? He's like, "Yeah, we lived in Singapore, then the US, and then Australia, and then Indonesia, and now we're in Malaysia." And I'm like, "What? Why?" Trying to wrap my head around this like life philosophy. And it's just it's that bandwidth thing, right? Like if you're so used to just like you're used to what you're used to, and you don't really want to get outside your comfort zone, all of that seems so intimidating. Like if you told me, "Hey man, you got to move to Kuala Lumpur tomorrow," I'd shit a brick, dude. I would be. And so yeah, I mean people who have done that, people who have like global lives, global families, been all over the world, like it's really interesting to me to think about putting myself in the shoes of someone who can really like wherever you go, there you are, and they're really comfortable with that idea. And there's something in that. There's some lesson in there that I think we can all learn from the perspective of being a high performing professional, a high performing athlete, a high performing this, and entrepreneurship too, for that matter, right? Like if you're trying to do anything entrepreneurial, everything you do feels like that. Every new thing you try feels like you've just moved to a new country and you're the outsider and you feel like an imposter. You're like trying to do things and you're afraid everybody's going to know that you don't know what you're doing. Right. It's like you got this hat on that says like, "I'm a fucking idiot," and everybody's going to find out. So, I don't know. I think it's really fascinating, and I don't really have a point here. I don't think. I'm just observing that, there's an element of courage to that I find admirable.
Yeah. I think this kind of reminds me of this conversation about like forms of life, right? Like the way you live your life, it kind of translates to other aspects of your life too. And because of my experience, I've lived in different areas and I've kind of like explored, quote unquote, like in different areas, that kind of shows up in my training too. And that's probably where like one of the reasons why I have an affinity towards ecological approach of like my life already has that type of like, there's some variability here. I'm not just doing one routine every day, all day, right? And that kind of shows up in my training, my playing style, or whatever that could be. So I think it's one of those things where like performance, weight room, pain management, it's bigger than just what we see in the gym, in clinic. It's like, hey, each person has their own context and an own form of life, their own like ways of behaving. And our job isn't to tell them that they're doing it wrong. It's like, okay, how can we nudge them towards better? And better is their definition of better, right? Like, how can we figure that out together instead of having this ego-centered, clinician-centered approach of like, I know better. This is what you're supposed to do. No. It's more about, hey, tell me what's important to you. How can we get you there? I have some ideas of like, I have knowledge about anatomy. I have knowledge about movement. I have knowledge about pain. Let's share my expertise with your expertise of what you want your life to be like. And like, let's move forward, right? Like, whatever forward that means, it's not a perfect straight line. And I like how you use that analogy of like narrow lane versus bandwidth. It's a lot less like a sprint lane than it's more like a hike, right? Like you have a lot more to see on the path. And sometimes we get lost and we kind of waste time sometimes, but step out of the lane a little bit, like we get to, it's safe. And my job is when I see that they're just like trying to sprint or staying in the same spot, let's free it up. Let's look at this area. Let's look at this area to like enrich their life a little bit.
Like
yeah.
That. Yeah. I like that.
I think, a lot.
I think that's one of those,
big analogy guy, by the way. Big analogy guy.
I was just going to say, I had thought and I lost it. Couldn't have been that good. Never mind. Ignore me.
Dang, I'm sorry. That's my fault.
No.
I've had a bad brain for decades, man. That has nothing to do with you. This is all the operating system I got. This is it. This is it.
So have you run into the thing that I've run into fairly frequently working with kids? There's such a deep-seated social aspect to this. When you're encouraging a young athlete to try to open up their bandwidth, I have found that a 12 to 15-year-old boy, specifically, their greatest fear in life is feeling embarrassed. And I know that because I asked. I had a room full of like 8th and 9th graders, and I said, "What's your deepest fear?" And they stared at me like, "What?" And I said, "I bet it's feeling embarrassed." And like 3 kids, like all at once, go, "Oh yeah, that's for sure it." And I that all started because I was trying to get them to do this variable lunge series. I was like, guys, there's no rules. Move your body in as creative a way as you can. And of course, they're like robotically going like lunge to the left, lunge to the right, and it's just the same lunge. They're just facing due east and then due north, you know. And I said, guys, you gotta be brave here. Like nobody's judging you. You're feeling embarrassed for no reason. Like I'm telling you, move weird, have fun. And all of a sudden they go in their little shell. What strategies? I'm sure you found that. I guess I'm going to assume you've probably found that. What kind of strategies have you had success with in getting people to kind of let go of those like fear-based social constraints around exploring, being variable, opening up the bandwidth, doing things and failing, doing something that they might perceive as weird?
Yeah, I mean, that's always hard. Because we can't just tell them all the time and like, hey, nobody's judging, like you just go ahead, right? Like if it was that simple all the time, like this would be really easy. So I think scaling the variability and exploration is how I approach it. Is like sometimes like my sessions aren't that exploratory. It just might be like changing the grip width in 1 or 2 of the activities that are traditional gym activities. And that's okay sometimes to me. And like there are going to be some warm-up activities that are everybody's already moving weird, or the weirdness isn't crazy, right? It's just a little bit of variability. So kind of being able to scale that, if I recognize that, hey, they're just, I could tell that they're uncomfortable. This is their first time engaging with any exploratory activity like this. I can just put them in like the most chaotic, creative activity here. So it just might start with like, okay, we're gonna do some jumps or light tier plyos, but you're gonna change up the direction. You get to choose which direction to go. So I think just giving a little bit more guidance, a little bit more constraint, so that they can focus their exploration is maybe what I would, or I have done, I guess, in a way, instead of like when it's just completely open, like it can be difficult. So hey, let's focus on changing this up. You can, everything can look whatever, but this particular part, you're going to change it every rep. You're going to change it every set. I think that's kind of how I approach it, is to guide their ability to explore as well. And I think most of the time that can be helpful. At the same time, it's like a long-term thing, right? It's not like one session, like they come in super rigid and at the end of the session they're going to be completely fluid and then just free. No, like that's too easy. But it's like if we can kind of build on that and find one activity that they're like, okay, I'm good, I'm exploring, I'm just doing weird things. I'm like, great, let's feed into that. And how can we evolve that movement to translate to other movements being a little bit more open and free
I
as
think
well?
that's a really good way to do it, because there's like Zach said, when we work with younger people, even when I have people at the clinic who come in and their perception of what they need to do and they're like so rigid, you have to almost build the trust that you're like, it's fine. Like I can cue you all day. Like my wife's the physical therapist, she's an occupational therapist, but she functions as our physical therapist. And she's like, I can cue you all day, but until you decide to do something different, it's not going to change. So it's now granted we deal with quite a few adults, so it's a much easier, like we can bridge that gap a little bit much more like bluntly. We can be like, hey, you got to try something different, right? Whereas like with young athletes, Zach, you can second this, and I'm sure you can, Yuji, you third this, but the biggest thing is like if you can get one duckling to walk sideways, then the rest of the ducks kind of fall in line, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, we can all walk sideways, right? But one of the guys there has to be brave enough to be strange, and not just you or Zach or myself in the setting being strange. Someone has to be odd enough to be weird, and then everyone else goes, oh, okay, my guard's down. I can just kind of reign free, and that's when big plateaus get broken. Is as soon as the space becomes like
Yeah.
really safe, or they feel like they're seen, like the athlete or the client feels like they're seen as a person, then they're like, I feel really good. And it's like, well, yeah, this is the energy here is safe. Like everything here is a good place for you to explore whatever you may or may not want to do, because you know you're not going to get hurt. Like, you know, you're in a good area, like mentally and physically. So I like the way you put that, Yuji. It's like you kind of got to like just tweak little bits until like in time they go, oh, all right, now it's my session. Like I'm driving my change, which is, yeah, that's cool. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, one of the ways that we've implemented that in the specific baseball context in our pitching development program is was it last year, Alex, we started doing the arm slot stuff, or was it 2 years ago? I think it was last year.
Last year. Yeah, last
We
year.
started doing a chunk of our warm-ups where they were instructed like sling it sidearm, submarine, like three-quarter, like change your arm slot around and explore it. The only rule is that you have to be really loose. You just have to relax and like sling it. And we're saying like stupid cues, like let it eat, sling it, like let her buck, baby. Like this is
Rip
not.
that leather.
Yeah. Fuck that pill, son. Like, and but it's just trying to encourage like relaxation. And we found that you bring guys back to their sort of standard arm slot, all of a sudden some of these arm action things clean up on their own because they've been allowed to sort of inform their nervous system on what clean movement feels like in other areas. And it's fascinating how fast that worked. I was on board with it from the beginning, but I wasn't, even I was surprised with how quickly it cleaned up some of the arm actions that we saw without having that conversation of like, throw ball, was that right? No, dude.
I have a question for Yuji, because I know your opinion on this, Zach. But so like I'm not a big fan of constraint based learning. I really don't like I don't like implements a lot. I don't like movement balls. I don't like I feel like the neurological feedback is so much less when you have so many other things prompting the patterning, versus if you can get someone to feel something, like genuinely feel something, that pattern's gonna a lot quicker because they'll know what that was, versus if you have them with like six bands, or like when you're trying to get someone in pain, you have the range of motion limited so much that they can't like really find space. So I just want to, what's your opinion on that as far as like constraint based cueing or constraint based learning, whether it be pain or like patterning, anything like that?
Yeah, I think it's we can't necessarily like put a big umbrella over constraints based learning, I think, because there's a lot of ways constraints led approaches bastardize, right? If I think what you're describing is like they're so
Yes.
constrained in a way that is like it's just so overwhelming, and they have no ways to explore different options, and they don't get to actually learn what it
Mm-hmm.
feels like or what
Mm-hmm.
they're moving.
Yeah.
Clarify or correct me
No,
if I'm
yeah,
if
like
I'm
let me give you an example of something that like I see a lot is will be, and this would be specific to like throwing. Okay, because this is like the lowest hanging fruit. There's a lot of gimmicks in baseball, that kind of stuff. Whereas where you get to the training in the gym, the gimmicks kind of they fall away a lot quicker, because realistically, like we're all either using a barbell or we're doing a sprint of some sort or we're doing a jump of some sort. There's less of that. But like in throwing, you'll see a guy with like a core velocity belt on, sitting on a box with a throwing ball, with an Indian club in his front arm, and none of that actually looks like throwing. None of that's actually throwing. So that's when I use the term constraint based, that's what I'm thinking of, like the extreme end of it. Or you see like a strength and
Yeah.
conditioning example would be the Joel Seedman type situation where it's like,
Yeah.
these are the 7 things you need to do this correctly. And it's like, I don't feel that is beneficial a lot of the time.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. So that's what I would describe a constraining to constrain, meaning using a bunch of constraints to force them into one specific way
Yeah.
to move, right? And just repeat that, which violates the ecological dynamics principles of motor learning, right? It's less about forcing them into a particular movement, but using constraints to direct their attention or intention towards certain types of solution space that they can actually explore. So if they took just one of those, for example, right, and the coach has to actually have an intention of what we're looking for here in terms of directing those constraints, in terms of like, why are we using that, right? And then you allow them to explore what different, say, like, say if we're using just the connection ball or whatever, right? Arm ball. Like, can we encourage them to explore, okay, what does it feel like when the ball goes forward versus when the ball goes backwards or sideways, stuff like that, without any other like things that are constraining them to move in a perfect way, right? So I think that would be a better way to use things like that. And I'm sure it's like there are moments where even any implement is unnecessary slash inappropriate. But I think that's the biggest difference is like, are we using constraints to force them into a certain type of movement, or are we using constraints to nudge their movement problem solving into a certain direction? So if they're like, without any constraints, if they're doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? Constraints is one way to kind of nudge them out of that space so that they explore different solutions, right? So that's the conversation about like, if you do the same thing over and over and over again, nothing's going to change. But if we can help them nudge, and that could be instructional, that could be task, that could be environmental. We use those things to, again, like, okay, what you're currently doing is fine, but can we do you have other options? We got to expand the bandwidth here. If you only have one option, that's a fragile system.
Yeah.
Can we try out different things?
The constraints they turn into constrictions very easily when people misunderstand the concept of constraint led approach. You said something in your explanation there about directing attention, and I think that's one of the biggest pieces that both athletes and coaches miss. Sticking with the throwing example, we've definitely seen this happen before, where we might have an athlete start his delivery in a certain position. We'll constrain him in that way, and we'll say, we want you to start with your left leg off the ground. You're balancing on your right leg, and we want you to just like move forward and throw and feel what that feels like. We're nudging you in the direction of like staying on your back leg longer, whatever it is. And this happens pretty frequently where we've sort of failed to direct attention properly. Kid will throw the ball and he'll like spike it or sail it, right? And he'll throw it 34 feet and just Gronk spike the thing. And then he'll like whip around and he'll look at you and go, like that? Is that right? And we're like this. We're like
it's
no,
kind of right.
No, like it's so easy for everybody involved to forget that in sports, in athletics, any movement is kind of a means to an end. You're never really moving for its own sake. You're moving to affect the environment around you in whatever way. I'm moving to throw the ball. I'm moving to hit the ball. I'm moving to throw a pass, catch a ball, and kick the ball, whatever it is, whatever sport. I am moving to affect the environment in a particular way. So if I'm changing my movement or trying to get better at the movement, it is to more effectively affect the environment. So you have to like be so mindful of continuing to direct attention towards the output of said movement. And because athletes, they'll try to get better at it, and they might do even exactly what you ask. But there's this little minutia of these things that then they don't get. The arm timing isn't right or whatever it is. And they'll spike it or sail it. Or I've even had this happen when I'm working with hitters, and they'll swing and miss. They'll be like that? No, dude, we're trying to hit it. What are you talking about? No, not like that. You missed. What are we doing? But that's really on me as the coach, because I didn't direct the attention towards like the actual task goal. Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And so it's so easy. It's so easy to slip up. Your guardrails turn into just like, there's no like finish line in sight for the athlete. You're trying to put up bumpers so that they can hit the pins and get a strike, but you forget to point their direction.
They're just getting good at doing the doingness of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the skill, right? Like it's are we using the constraints? Like the two extreme ends are the using constraints / practice designs, cues to handcuff somebody into just one movement. And the other side is like, we don't do the right one, we don't do enough, where it's just completely random, right? And just being able to kind of navigate that is not easy, right? And like you said, sometimes we come across situations where like, that did not turn out the way we thought it was gonna. But that's the beauty of it. We get to like pivot and like, okay, like we can spend a couple more reps here, but this is clearly not working, so let's figure out something else. And I've gotten a lot better at accepting that, like, things like that happen, right? Like in clinic, when there's pain and there's other clinicians around, other students around, it's like from rep one, it has to look perfect, right? You kind of have that mentality sometimes, but it's like, dude, it shouldn't be like that. Like there's no learning, there's no improvement happening if everything looked pretty from day one, like, or rep one, I should say.
Well, that opens a whole other can of worms. It's like, perfect for what? Perfect for what outcome? Even in just a basic exercise. Like, most people would look at somebody like a gymnast or a break dancer or a skateboarder or an action sports athlete, and they admire the movement prowess of somebody like that. But then they go in the gym and they're like, my knees must never pass my toes, and I have to keep my back perfectly straight. It's like, are you watching? Are you looking? So looking pretty for what? For what outcome?
I think the in the medicine world, as far as like clinician wise, like one of my favorite sayings, and I learned this from my mentor, is they call it medical practice, not medical perfect. He's like, you're literally every single day you're going to get hit with something that you've never seen before. And you go, well, how about we try this, and that, all right, let's see what we got. Cause it's like, that's really what people are coming, especially in the outpatient setting. And even as training, like as coaches, they're looking for someone to try something different, because they've probably gone down other routes and they've gotten nowhere. And they're like, it's almost encouraging for you to just be a person, be like, you want to try this? Let's see how it goes. And they'll be like, sure, let's try it. But it's cool that it's like those things all translate to both like sport, training, medicine, really life, period. It's all kind of that same, it's that ecological, it's that the system itself operates with you and without you. Exactly. Yeah, it operates with you and without you. So whether you want to accept that it's happening to you or not, it probably is. So you got to just either get on board, or you got to change something so that you're not on board anymore. You got to figure out the bandwidth. You got to get wide so you can get narrow.
And it really, it's educated, right? We're not throwing out random shit. We're like, we still have a certain thought process behind it. Like, okay, with some level of confidence, I can say that this could have an effect, right? But I'm still open to that, me being wrong. Like, I'm going to throw, and I'm ready to just like have 1, 2, 3, 4 different ways to pivot, or just completely scrap it and move on, right? I think that's the key thing, is like being confident about what you're putting out there, and the fact that if something unexpected happens, I'm ready to pivot, or I know that the bandwidth of unexpected, right? The worst thing that could happen here, if I set these boundaries and if I design this activity this way, is that they could have a little bit of irritation with the joint, right? It's not like they're going to blow out the knee because I've designed it this way, right? So I think setting safe boundaries, whether that's training or whether that's rehab, pain management, so that we don't go to a place we absolutely don't want to go, right? and then kind of directing and hopefully kind of just course correcting over the time to like continue moving forward.
I think that's one of the biggest things that's missed a lot of times when you get like return from injury, whether it be throwing or like ACL or anything like that, is that it becomes this like linear progression because it's built into this packet. And this is what we have people do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like these return to throw progressions need to be like this moving target. These ACL progressions need to be this moving target. Like you can't have this, okay, at 16 months, this is the first time they're going to get to throw 100%. Well, what if at 8 months, at 80%, they have no pain? Can they throw 100% of that 80%? Probably. The ligaments healed, the joints healed. Yeah, good math. But that is, I think that's one thing that we don't give enough credit to the adaptability of the system when we put forth these huge, big blocks of like, this is how we're going to progress. And it's like, really, you should have like you said, we should have these boundaries that we've set forth, or like these markers or these goalposts that we want to move towards. But the goalpost might move. Just like in life, the goalpost can move. It can come closer. It can go further away. So at that point, you either got to accelerate or you got to pull back because you might not be ready for it yet. But to be like, okay, hey, you don't get to get on the mound or you don't get to run until this point. It's like, I'm not built like that person. My tolerance and my conditioning is not like them. And to give people the confidence to be like, hey, you're different than they are. Like you may not be at the same point as them. So just lean into that. Like, obviously what you're doing makes you you. We want you to be as you as possible. So find that home.
Yeah. And we get to do that. If we know the boundaries, we get to put them in representative situations a little bit more, right? Like if we're staying a little bit further away from those boundaries, we get to introduce variability. We get to have them explore. We get to have them actually, change the intention to actually compete against somebody in a very different way, maybe, right? So you're not facing a live hitter, but can you throw with the intent to affect somebody else's behavior, which is what pitching is, right? Or, throwing to kind of beat a time, or things like this, where we can try to sneak in slices of what they have to get back to, right? Whether that's sport or life, into early rehab processes, and again, know that it's still safe, instead of waiting until they're 80, 90, 100% to put them back into the 100% competitive situations. How can we sneak in these like slices of the game, slices of the life into low intensity, low load circumstances? That's kind of the things that I think about when I'm working with individuals for their particular context. How can I make this activity a little bit better, a little bit better?
Yeah. Usually we're coming up on time here a little bit. So if you don't have any other topics that you really feel like you want to cover, I want to give you a chance to kind of promote whatever you got to promote, tell people where to find you, and then we can kind of wrap.
Yeah, I am most active on social media on Instagram. My account is Huge Gains. I know it's kind of a silly name, but I made that
so good. Don't change it.
Ago, but like
it's
people
perfect.
like it, so I'm not changing it. YUJGAINS. And I am developing / beta testing like a preset program with a lot of this exploration and variability kind of incorporated. Again, not perfect. Like ideally I could work with every individual in an individualized manner, but I think this is a way to kind of just like let people experience things like this at a more affordable price without putting too much pressure on me. So I'm kind of starting to kind of like see how that shakes out. So official launch probably won't be for another couple of months, but if you're ever interested in kind of just trying out some of those things, check out my content and check out, or just honestly DM me, honestly.
I like it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again, Yuji. This was great. I think you might end up being one of our recurring guests because it's rare that we find somebody that we can really riff with like this. I think we could have gone for 2 hours. So it was great, man. Thanks again.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, I'd love it. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye.
Bye.